Hey everyone, and welcome to this, my second of 3 videos on the Nikon J1. In the first video we talked about what everything on the camera is. In the next video we'll go over all the menu items and talk about how they affect your photography. In this video we're going to talk about all of the non-menu functions and how to do everything you can do with this camera. So, being a digital camera, this thing can do nothing whatsoever without a good battery. So we're going to start right here on the bottom and we're going to open up the battery. Slide this clip in toward the camera and the spring, and it should pop it right open. Next we're going to slide the old battery out. Just push that yellow thing off to the side, pull the battery out, and grab a fresh battery. This camera uses Nikon ENEL20 batteries, and you slide them in just by doing this. And you know they are installed correctly if they go in, but also because that little hologram points toward is on the side closer to the inside of the camera. While we have the back of the camera or the bottom of the camera open, we're also going to install an SD card because you can't store any images without an SD card. So here's an SD card. This camera can use SD cards up to 2 terabytes. That said, a small SD card of 64 gigs is more than enough because this has a 10 megapixel sensor in it. A 128 gig SD card will hold 7,100 RAW files. So to install the memory card, we're going to put it in this way here. And oh, that's not going to work. So we're going to try sliding it in this way. And that's it right there. To install the memory card, you want to pop it in so that the label is towards the back of the camera here, and then when it's in, you simply close the battery chamber door. Next up, one of the really nice things about having an interchangeable lens camera is you can change the lenses, so let's see how to do that. This is the lens mount release right here. All you have to do to release a lens is push it in, and then rotate rotate clockwise until it stops, and then remove it. Okay. To mount a lens, you want to find this index right here, and there's a silver index on this lens, and what you do is you just simply line those two up and then turn counterclockwise until it clicks into place, and now you have mounted a lens on your camera. With this kit 10 to 30 lens, whenever you turn the camera on, or beforehand preferably, you have to push this button down and extend it, and also sometimes doing that it will automatically turn the camera on, and then there we go. Camera goes off. So there we are. It right here, this lock symbol indicates that it's locked for non-use, and then opening it, again turning the camera back on, will allow you to use the zoom range of 10 to 30 millimeters. So while we have the lens popped out so that the camera can actually be used, we're going to talk about the flash. On the back of the camera is a little flash switch, and if we slide it toward the outside of the camera, the flash will pop up. This is the only way to use a flash with this camera, is the one that is built into it that pops up. This is honestly, I gotta say, just like a super cute flash. I absolutely dig it. Boink. Okay, sorry. Back on topic. So anytime you use the flash, your sync speed is going to be 1/60th of a second. That's just the way that the computer is programmed with this, and that's the flash option for this camera. One thing to know about this camera is that none of the functions we're going to talk about here will work unless the lens is mounted and it is extended. So this is going to be a bit funky to try and get all of this to work, but we're going to work our ways through it. The first button, so we've seen up here the flash button. This is the one right here that pops up the flash. I'm just doing that for fun at this point. The next button we're going to talk about is this function button, right, or feature button. And the feature button has a job of selecting the drive mode. It only works if you're in green camera. So these mode dial options we'll talk about in just a second. But in green camera, if you select the feature button, now you can use the command wheel to select between single frame, continuous burst, or electronic shutter, which is a high speed burst mode. So this is just basically single frame. As you push the shutter button, it takes a photo. You can keep holding the shutter button down. Nothing will ever happen again. Continuous is you will hold the shutter button down and it will take photos until it underruns the buffer. Electronic high is it will do that, but faster. So just a matter of what you're shooting that determines which one of these modes you want to use. Hit F again to select it and exit. Oh, nope. Hit OK to select it and exit out. Yep, just like that. While we are now here on the viewfinder screen, let's talk about what all of this information is. Okay. This right here is your mode. So let's take a look at the camera mode wheel over here. I'm going to turn it, and as I do, you can see the mode goes to Smart Photo, Motion Snapshot, or all the way back to Movie. So this is indicating that I'm in camera mode right now. M indicates that I am in manual. Guess I don't know how I did that. We'll figure it out as we go. Continuous shooting over here. Neutral for the image toning. Auto white balance. Raw images are going to be recorded, not JPEGs. Autofocus automatic. The camera will pick the best autofocus mode based on what's in front of it. This down here is face priority autofocus, and that is, I think that's, I'm not sure what that symbol is. That's a new one for me. We'll come across that, and then I'll be like, oh yeah, that's what that was. This is the light meter display here. That's the magnification. That's how many photos rather remain on the SD card. My ISO setting, aperture setting, shutter speed setting, metering mode, battery remaining, audio. I believe that is the audio will be recorded on a video. No, that shouldn't be. This is still mode. That's probably indicating that beep is on for this camera. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about are the camera shooting modes. Okay. So we're going to start up here with Motion Snapshot, because that's on the top right here. And what Motion Snapshot does is it records about 1 second worth of images, and then when you playing back on the camera will play back a recording of those selected images. So basically, you get a second of photos, and then it will play those back as a motion, like a little GIF, like a 1 second long GIF. That's kind of fun. Next here is Smart Photo Selector. And Smart Photo Selector is a mode where the camera takes a series of images and then it selects the best 5 of them. What magic it uses to select the best 5, I don't know, but it will select, it looks like it will take up to 355 photos and then select 5 of them. So kind of neat. Again, that's sort of a mode that's like, that's a thing on cell phones. So this really, again, is showing itself as being designed for someone who is used to cell phones to step into an interchangeable lens camera. Here is still image mode. We're going to come back and do this one last because the length of the outline that I have on this is considerable, and we'll save it for a minute. And then next is movie mode. Movie allows you to record videos. Press the F button up here to switch between high def and slow motion. So F button brings up HD movies or slow motion. Slow motion is the one that cuts down to 320 by 120 pixels and gives you like 120 frames per second. So that's movie mode. With movie mode, the auto exposure lock and auto focus lock button right here will lock the exposure to prevent the image scene lighting from changing. What does that mean? I'm going to show you right now. So I've just turned off auto exposure lock on my camera, and now I'm going to open up the aperture, which simulates getting more light, and stop it down, which simulates getting less. If you can imagine this going on when you are trying to record a video, that is what AEL and AFL prevent. Now let's get back to a actual recording setting. So basically, AEL and AFL mean that even if you have your subject is black and then midtone and then bright white, that the overall exposure settings will not change so that you don't get what looks like a flickering in your videos, and your video results will be better. In your slow motion recording, the camera will record for up to 5 seconds of time or until it reaches 4 gigabytes of movie data, whichever comes first. So all of that covered, let's go back to still images. So F goes back, selects our drive mode. With still images in video 3, in the shooting menu section, I'm going to show you how to change from the scene auto to one of the standard modes, like PASM, and that's in manual right here. So right now I'm in manual. By default, this camera, if I remember correctly, will go into automatic scene mode when you switch into green box. But you can override that for more advanced users. And like I said, we'll see that in video 3. It's a menu option. So when you switch into still image mode, you'll notice that there's a green camera here. Magical green camera is what it's called generally by those of us who don't use it all that often. But this is a mode that's designed to make this camera function rather like a cell phone. So where it says M up here, that's full manual mode. By default, this camera does not go into full manual mode. By default, it goes into what's called auto scene selection, meaning the camera will look at what's in front of it, what's in the image, and decide whether that's food, sports, a portrait, a landscape, whatever, and use algorithm magic to decide what settings it should apply across the image to have the best results. We're going to go through all of the menus in the third video, but I'm going to show you how to turn off that default automatic mode right now. I'm going to go into menu, and now we're going to go into the shooting menu, and shooting menu option 2, way up here at the top. I planned that well. Exposure mode allows us to make that change. Hit OK, and so this is going to be the default right here. Scene auto selection. You could also change it to program, shutter priority, aperture, and priority, and manual. Program mode gives you back some of the control. Basically, the camera will pick the shutter speed and aperture, and then you can pick some of the other things like whether or not the flash is going to pop up. With Scene Auto Select, the flash will pop up whether you want it to or not, just because the camera thinks it should. With Shutter Priority mode, you pick the shutter speed, the camera will pick the best aperture. With Aperture Priority mode, the camera will pick you pick the aperture, the camera will pick the best shutter speed. And in full manual, you pick the aperture and shutter speed. If the photo turns out well, hey, that's because you did that. And if it turns out badly, well, hey, guess what? You get to own that as well. So I'm going to leave it in full manual because you get the most things that you can do. And yeah, but that's how you get into change that mode, and we'll see the rest of the menu button in video 3. But with the default magic green camera modes that this camera opens up to, you have portrait, landscape, night portrait, close-up, and auto mode. Those are the different ones it selects. So I didn't remember what all of them were, but I got a few right. So those are pretty self-explanatory. If the camera sees a person in front of it, it will switch into portrait mode. If you're taking a picture of a person, one of the things you can do to get the best results is have them be about 10 or so feet in front of whatever's behind them. And then this will help the camera to isolate that person and get them in focus and have the background be blurry. If you're shooting a landscape, you want to shoot at the widest setting of your lens. For portraits, by the way, you want to shoot at the narrowest. So on this lens, you'd want to shoot at 30 millimeters with a portrait. On landscape, you want to shoot with this lens at 10 millimeters. And basically what you would, with landscape, then it will use a small aperture for a deep depth of field, and you can have a good landscape photo if you have something nearby in the foreground, something kind of a little bit further in the midground, and then something distant in the background. Night portrait, if you have a photo of a person at night that you're taking a photo of, this will work best if you have a tripod. But basically what that does is that will fire the flash to illuminate the person you're taking a photo of, and it will also give you a long exposure to capture the background behind them. So with that, what you can do before you take the photo is tell the person you're about to take the photo of, hey, don't move, because if they move, they'll be illuminated, but when they stand up, all the lights that were behind them will shine through them. Close-up, if the camera realizes it's focusing on something close, we'll switch to close-up mode, which will help get better close-up photos through algorithm magic. And then auto mode is just the general automatic shooting based on whatever the camera thinks it needs, it will give you. Now, while we're back here, let's go and look at the display info. And if we push the display button, we can scroll through 2 different display options that tell you different amounts of information. If you want to have the maximum amount of information, here you go. If you want to have a little bit less and have more of your scene visible, here you go. So those are your 2 options with display. Auto exposure lock, if you're using one of the automatic modes, P, A, or S, program, aperture priority, or shutter priority, you can use auto exposure lock to lock your exposure settings into place so that your exposure settings don't shift on you. exposure value compensation over here. If you're using PA or S, what you can do with exposure value compensation is force the camera to overexpose or underexpose your images. So if you're in program aperture priority or shutter priority mode and you're like, hey, this image is really dark, you can use exposure value compensation to increase the amount of lightness, the amount of light reaching your image, or decrease it. And actually it looks like it's the aperture is being adjusted in full manual, but with this mode, in those semi-automatic modes, you can force the camera to behave in a way that's different from what it's programmed to do. Flash will pull up your flash options, which are flash, red eye reduction, and rear sync. So flash is standard flash mode. At the beginning of the aperture, at the beginning of the exposure, the camera will trigger the flash and the scene will be illuminated. Red eye, the flash will pulse prior to the photo being taken and shrink the pupils of anybody in the photo so that their eyes aren't red. And rear curtain, the entire photo will be taken and then the flash will be triggered. So that's the difference between the first and third. Sounds minor, actually kind of major. If you're using a 1/60th of a second shutter speed, standard and rear curtain don't matter whatsoever because it's so fast. But if you're using a 15-second shutter speed, this fires and then 15 seconds of exposure, or 15 seconds of exposure and then this fires. So rear curtain would be really good. Let's say you're going to do a 10-second or 15-second photo of a car driving through the frame, and at the very end of it, it's dark out, it's night. At the very end, you're going to trigger the flash. You'll have the lights of that car being recorded on the sensor, and then at the end, the flash, and boom, the shutter finishes. You'll have that car illuminated with its lights trailing off of it. So with the first mode, you'd have the car illuminated and then the lights shooting forward from it. That's an illustration that explains how those are done differently. And then the last one here is your self-timer. Do you want it off, 10, 5, 2 seconds, 2 seconds after a remote's been pressed, or remote with no self-timer? So just a matter of personal preference there. Let's go back really quickly into exposure modes, and I'm going to pick program mode. And that way I can show you should be able to show you how auto AEL works. Nope, it is not working. There we go. So exposure compensation is going to let me, if I push it, I can increase the amount of light or decrease the amount of light. I can force program aperture priority or shutter priority to give me a brighter or darker image. In full manual mode, I just make that adjustment myself. Exposure value compensation doesn't do anything at all. So we'll go back here with auto exposure lock. Here you can see when I hold it down in the bottom left of the screen, it says AEL. That means that the exposure value, the shutter speed, and aperture are being saved as long as I hold this button in place. When I let go of it, it turns off. So that's what that's telling you. So having gone through all of these different functions, let's talk about what's needed to take a picture on the camera or with the camera. The idea of this camera is that you dial in all of your settings ahead of time, and then when you want to take a photo, you just push the shutter button. It's that simple. Just, there you go. Push the shutter button and take a photo, and it will, if you've done everything correctly, it should turn out well. And that's how you take a photo with the camera. So that's everything in terms of external functionality with this camera. In the next video, we'll talk about all of the menu items and how all of them affect your photography. See you guys in that video.